Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the Druker Traveling Fellowship Presentations 2023. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Harvard University is located on the traditional ancestral land of Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is known as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. The school also recognized the work of the Harvard University Native American program in cultivating the relationship that led to the creation of this acknowledgement. We are here to celebrate the presentations of the Druker Prize, which I feel really is essential to enhance the field of the urban design that is dramatically changing and becoming more important as our society addresses new issues like the request for more sustainable environment, better civic spaces, increasing social justice and inclusive housing. For students competing for and winning the prize, the fellowship offers a challenge by developing his or her individual project after the overwhelming experience of at least 2 years intensive at the GSD. The fellowship offers the students the opportunity to travel domestically or abroad to pursue the study that advances their understanding of urban design. The fellowship, as probably you know, is open to all GSD master students who demonstrate excellence in the design of urban environments. The fellowship must be used within the 2 years after the graduation, and the recipient is expected to deliver a lecture at the GSD like today. We have also 2 of the fellowships that they are going to do to follow this requirement. All this is possible due to the smart intuition and generosity of Ron Druker, who in 1986, meaning 37 years ago, pointed out the idea that urban design will be a fast-evolving field. He then created with the GSD the fellowship and followed a generous gift to the support of the Druker Design Gallery outside this room. But it's not only this. Ron is following every step of the 35 graduated students who have had the benefit of being awarded developing their first project after the research period at Harvard School of Design. For the reason, I'm going to invite Ron Druker to say a few words about his experience following the fellowship for more than 3 decades. Please join me in asking Ron Druker to come to the podium to speak.
I'll speak right here. So I apologize to the fellows, okay, to Carolyn for a schedule snafu. I was caught between the tradition, which is 5,000 years old, and caught between a tradition which is 36 years old. And that was a rock and a hard place. And heretofore, some of you might not know. Okay, I mean, I assume you could still hear me. Okay, but heretofore, the presentations were made at a luncheon specifically for the current UD class. And it was fine, but it was esoteric, and the kids, frankly, they had class, and it shortened the presentation. And last November, we had 2 prior fellows make their presentation, and it was at 6 o'clock at night, and the Piper was filled, and then we had a dinner over, we owe you a dinner, we had a dinner over at the Charles Square Hotel, and it was terrific. So I really appreciate everyone who worked to make this afternoon happen, to allow me to be here, because it makes me really happy to be here. And as I say at the lunch, I'm lucky enough to be in a position to have worked with Dean Jerry McHugh to create this fellowship. And now it's 36, 37 years later, and it's still going. Thank you, Harvard management. There's a lot of money that gets distributed, and really to the fellows and a little bit for administration, which is really what I want, because it should be for the fellows. And from traveling across the United States to traveling around the world, I've believed that both domestically and internationally, that travel is the greatest part of education. So thank you all for being here. Once again, I apologize to you all for this, and I thank everyone from the GSD for making, I guess, making the mountain come to Muhammad, but it wasn't my intention. So thank you all very much, and good luck.
Thank you very much, Ron, for your presence, also your passion and your continuous contribution. As I said, I think you are acknowledging, you are promoting the prize, but also acknowledging any step that the prize is moving on. I'd like to thank also the Druker Traveling Fellowship Selection Committee members, some of them present here in the audience, Rahul Mehrotra, Rick Peiser, Peter Rowe, and Carol Bulgaris. Now, if you allow me, I'm going to introduce the two presenters today, the two Druker Fellows, Carolyn and Laura. Carolyn Angius MUP 2019 is an urban planner and designer in Los Angeles, California. She is passionate about partnering with community members to build inclusive, safe, and vibrant public spaces for all, particularly in underserved neighborhoods. Carolyn is a planning associate at Conquis Design Initiative, where her work focuses on gender-inclusive transport and equitable public space planning and design. Carolyn also has experience in public policy and implementation in the Office of California Governor Edmund Brown Jr., and Carolyn holds a Bachelor of Arts from Scripps College and a Master in Urban Planning from the Harvard Graduate School of Design. The second fellow is Laura Greenberg MAUD 2020. She's an associate at Urban American City, where she contributes as an urban designer, registered architect, and research. Recent work includes public realm design and activation, community wealth building efforts, and creative reuse of vacant spaces in legacy cities. Her independent research focuses on registered eco-districts across US and multi-scalar equitable reuse strategies for vacant public schools in Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit, and Pittsburgh. She is recently published as the author of AIA Equitable Development Framework, co-editor of Pattern Justice Design Languages for Just Pittsburgh, and contributor to the Highline Network's Community First Toolkit. I want to remind that after Carolyn and Laura presentations, the fellows will join a discussion that we're going to have here, and it's going to be open also to the Q&A from the audience. Right now, we will start with the first presentation. I invite you to join me in welcoming Carolyn to the podium. Please, Carolyn.
Thanks so much. All right. My name's Carolyn Angius, and I graduated from the GSD in 2019 when I was incredibly fortunate to receive the Druker Traveling Fellowship. I'm honored to have the opportunity to come back today and share my research with you all. I'm hoping hoping you walk away from this presentation with a deeper understanding of the ways in which our often invisible assumptions about gender shape our built environments, some of the approaches to build a more gender-inclusive public realm, and an understanding of why urban planning and design is critical to achieving gender equity. I'll give an overview of my research, highlight key findings, and then hand it over to Laura. I'd also like to thank the Druker family and the Urban Planning and Design Department for the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity afforded by the fellowship and for inviting me back today. This presentation would also not be possible without the generosity and the wisdom of planners and designers and city officials and researchers and advocates and community members that I met with along the way. The focus of my research is the spatial implications of gender-inclusive urban planning and design. I wanted to know what the public realm, namely transportation systems and public spaces, looks and feels like when planned and designed to be safer, more comfortable, and more inclusive of women, girls, and gender nonconforming individuals. At this point, you might be wondering, what does gender and gender equity have to do with urban planning and design in the first place? And these are questions I first asked myself here in this building when I took a studio with Shalina Odbert, co-founder and CEO of Konkui Design Initiative, where I also now work. We were asked to redesign a park in an informal settlement outside of Mendoza, Argentina, to be gender inclusive. You might wonder, as I did, what makes a park inclusive of gender? Aren't parks for everyone by definition? What we heard from women in Mendoza and learned from the global research quickly proved that public spaces, despite their promise, are often inaccessible, unwelcoming, and unsafe for many women, girls, and gender nonconforming people. And this leads to an important question. Why is this the case, and how did we get here? This is partially because women and those of nonconforming genders are underrepresented in decision-making processes that shape our built environments. As we all know, the fields of planning and design have historically been dominated by men, mostly able-bodied, upper-class, cisgender white men. As a result, our cities' parks, neighborhoods, transportation systems reflect the daily lives of those men, and women and gender nonconforming people are often left out of the picture. They have also been marginalized in public engagement processes, further limiting their voice. Most marginalized have been women and gender nonconforming people who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Another reason is that at a deeper level, the practices of planning and design, like all professional practices, are embedded within a larger structure of patriarchy, sexism, racism, ableism, and other isms, and our built environments reflect these broader biases and inequities in our culture. Taken together, this adds up to gender biases in the built environment that both reflect and perpetuate gender exclusion in society more broadly. And this has day-to-day impacts in the lives of women and gender minorities, affecting physical and mental health outcomes, economic opportunity, civic participation, and more. And that's where my research comes in. While literature documents these challenges, there's little about what an alternative looks like. I wanted to know, what does a park that is safe and inviting for those of all genders look like? How do you transform transportation systems to work better for women and gender nonconforming riders? And given the diversity of experience of gender, how are planners and designers thinking about gender-inclusive design in their own communities? Many cities around the world have begun to answer these questions. I went to 5 where public spaces or transportation systems have been redesigned to be more gender-inclusive: Vienna, Austria, Mexico City, Mexico, Cape Town, South Africa, Mumbai, India, and Nagareyama, Japan. 3 are home to public space projects, and 4 are home to transportation projects. And in each place, I took tours with those involved in creating the project, conducted site observation in the day and night, and interviewed key stakeholders. It's also important to note that I completed my travel before the onset of the pandemic in March 2020. I tried to continue following the projects as best I could throughout the following years, but my research reflects the state of them before the pandemic, acknowledging that such a monumental event may have impacted the projects or shaped the communities in new ways since I left. Throughout this presentation, when I say woman, I'll be referring to anyone that identifies as a woman, including trans women. And when I say gender nonconforming, I'll be referring to those whose gender or gender expression does not match cultural norms, including those who have non-binary genders. Today, I'll share key findings from my research and zoom in on a few case studies, first related to public space, then related to mobility. In this room, we're probably all familiar with the benefits of public space. It promotes physical and mental health, economic development, environmental resilience, and social infrastructure and cohesion. However, women, girls, and gender nonconforming people often do not have full access to the benefits of public space. Women and girls are more likely to feel unwelcome or uncomfortable in parks, in part because they're often designed to privilege male-dominated activities that take up a lot of space, like soccer fields or basketball courts. Additionally, women, girls, and gender nonconforming people are more likely to experience fear, harassment, and violence in public space. And women are also more likely to visit parks as a caretaker, such as with children. In the 1990s, a study by the city of Vienna found that park use among girls and boys was similar until about age 9, at which point use by girls dropped off while use by boys stayed steady. In response, the city undertook a pilot project to redesign 2 parks through a participatory process with women and girls to learn what deterred them and what they wanted to see in the parks. One of these was Einsiedler Park. Einsiedler Park is in a centrally located and relatively low-income neighborhood in Vienna with a large population of immigrants and refugees. The city partnered with community organizations and schools in the neighborhood to host workshops with women and girls to learn what they liked and didn't like about the park. This is a view of the park after the redesign process, and as a result of the process, one of the key changes was the redesign of the sport court. Before the redesign, the park had 2 basketball courts surrounded by a high fence with a single entrance. Women and girls shared they didn't use the courts because they were often dominated by men playing basketball, and the single narrow entrance was intimidating and felt unsafe. As a result, the city changed the court shape to make it more comfortable and inviting. They broke up the courts with play and gathering spaces between them to invite use by others and limit the ability of any single group to dominate. They also created multiple wide entrances and added play areas and seating around the edges to introduce new uses and improve movement from inside and outside the fence. Finally, while one of the courts is striped for soccer and basketball, another has no lines, so it's flexible for uses like dance, gymnastics, volleyball, or anything else. The courts are divided by 2 small islands that community members sit and play on. Seating and shaded areas border the court, and the bottom image shows a woman and a toddler in a stroller on the multi-use court. The 2 were using it to practice walking. This project underscores the intersection between gender and race and ethnicity, and the importance of engaging women and girls at all stages of design. During engagement, young women in the neighborhood's Roma community shared they didn't use the park because they felt family members could look down on them from upper-story windows in the buildings that surrounded, and they wanted a greater sense of privacy and independence using the park. This ran counter to the city's initial assumptions that creating open spaces with high visibility would increase perceptions of safety and comfort for women and girls. As a result, the city used plantings and art structures that helped create a sheltered feeling while maintaining sightlines at the ground level for safety. As with the sport court, the concept of breaking up larger spaces into smaller spaces also shows up in other parks in Vienna. Hammocks and benches carve out defined, semi-private nooks within larger lawns and invite individuals in small groups and avoid any one group dominating the space. A variety of platform seating serves the same function, creating smaller, defined spaces that individuals and small groups can claim without any one group dominating. Another example of gender-inclusive park design comes from Cape Town, South Africa. The nonprofit design organization VPUU, or Violence Prevention Through Urban Upgrading, partners with communities in informal settlements, or townships, to transform underutilized lots into multi-purpose community spaces. We'll zoom in on one of their projects called Lotus Park. VPUU undertook a participatory design process to create a vision for an empty lot, and similar to in Vienna, learned that the lot was often dominated by men and boys, and women and girls felt uncomfortable and unsafe using it. To address these concerns, VPUU undertook two main strategies. The first was to stripe the sport court in the new park with not just lines for soccer, as is often the case, but to add lines for netball, a popular female-dominated sport in the area. Striping for netball invited use by women and girls, and one of the city's most popular teams, the Mighty City Netball Club, now practices there. Another hallmark of the VPUU process is programming. During the planning and design process and before construction ever began, VPUU partnered with early childhood education providers to offer free, pop-up childcare services and youth programs on the lot. Because women are often caretakers, this helped encourage use by women and their families and started turning the tide on perceptions of the site before construction. Programming is also central to the long-term gender inclusion strategy. The sport court does not stand alone. It's lined by destinations that are frequented by women and girls to encourage their use and send the message that this space was designed with them in mind. The community garden, the Childhood Development Center, the Neighborhood Center are all operated by a nonprofit organization that employs local women and helps activate the space 24/7 for improved perceptions of safety. Next, we'll take a look at different strategies cities have employed to create a more gender-inclusive transportation system. Because of their caretaking roles, women and men have different travel patterns. While men are more likely to travel in a direct, longer route between residential areas and downtowns, women are more likely to make shorter trips closer to home with multiple stops, called trip chaining, such as stopping at the grocery store or childcare on the way home from work, and sometimes repeating visits to the same destination in a single day. Women are also more likely to travel with others, like children and older adults. They spend a greater share of their income on transportation than do men. They spend more time traveling for a variety of reasons, like using less efficient modes like walking or the bus, as opposed to high-speed rail or car, making more stops, and waiting at transfers. Women are also more likely to travel during off-peak hours like the afternoon when transit comes less frequently. Women also experience harassment and assault while traveling, and in many cities are more likely to be victims of traffic violence. There's need for more research on the travel patterns and experiences of gender nonconforming people, but the research that does exist demonstrates they face an even greater risk of harassment and assault. And our transportation systems were not designed with these travel patterns in mind. Most transportation systems are set up to privilege the way that men traditionally travel, radial routes that connect outlying, more residential areas to downtowns. You can see that pattern in the MBTA map here in Boston and the Metro map in LA, where I live. As a result, travel is inefficient, expensive, and dangerous for women and gender nonconforming people. This results in missed opportunities and day-to-day physical and mental health impacts, and because women are so often caregivers, has generational ripple effects. I went to 4 cities that are doing something to address these challenges, and their strategies represent 2 different approaches. Scholars categorize these as practical or strategic. On one side, practical solutions strive to make it easier and safer for women to travel in the ways that reflect their gender roles, such as making it easier for women to travel with children or making it faster to trip chain to the grocery store on the way home from work. On the other side, strategic solutions seek to create opportunities to transform gender-related travel patterns and catalyze broader cultural shifts in gender roles. The first case brings us back to Vienna. Vienna piloted strategies to improve mobility for women and gender minorities in a central district called Maria Hilf. Because women are more likely to depend on walking, Vienna transformed streets with popular destinations into pedestrian priority zones with car drop-off and pickup only. In order to better accommodate caregivers traveling with strollers or those with limited mobility, they widened sidewalks and eliminated curbs. Active street-facing uses like retail and transparent glass walls also foster perceptions of safety. The city also added inviting, playful seating throughout the district, which has added benefits for those traveling with bags or with dependents, and you often see groups gathered on them. Here's another image of the seating being used to feed a child mid-trip. Finally, the city added paved ramps in sections of the district's many stairwells to make it easier to push strollers and carts up and down them. This was a cost-effective, quick way to retrofit the district's many stairwells. The next example comes from Mexico City, which has undertaken both strategic and practical efforts to address gender-related mobility challenges. A 2008 study found that 90% of women in Mexico City have experienced sexual violence or harassment while using the city's transit system. I want to note here that while this number is extremely high, very few other cities collect and report this kind of data. This is not a Mexico City problem, but rather a common problem that Mexico City has taken unique steps to document and address. However, not all women are affected equally. While higher income women can opt to drive or use rideshare for safety, efficiency, and reliability, lower income women are stuck depending on a system that was not designed with them in mind. In response, Mexico City implemented a program called Viaja Segura, which created women's-only cars on the metro, which now are in service 24 hours a day. Overall, the women's-only cars have improved safety for women traveling. A study found that 80% of women feel safer on the metro as a result of the cars, and they have increased women's access to the city. Over half of women report being able to go further, see family and loved ones, and get to know the city better because of the women's cars. However, the program has also had some negative outcomes. The gender-based car segregation has reinforced the false concept of gender as binary, either male or female. Additionally, most of the cars on trains are non-gender specific general boarding cars, and there are very few women's cars. And that dynamic has reinforced the gendering of public space as the domain of men, siloing women to a semi-private space. It also reinforces limiting cultural norms that caretaking is a woman's job. For example, when families enter the station together, it's not uncommon to see women and children in the family separate and head towards the women's platform, while men head to the general platforms. There have also been cases of women harassing and assaulting gender nonconforming people using the women's-only cars. And finally, gender separation does not address the root causes of gender-based violence while traveling, nor the many other gender-related travel patterns. city is beginning to take steps to address some of those root causes. In 2019, under direction from a new mayor, Mexico City's transportation agency studied 7 of the city's largest transportation hubs, called Centrams, for improvements from a gender perspective. Centrams are multimodal connection hubs where many bus and metro lines come together. And they're of particular importance in women's trips because women are more likely to transfer. Redesign of one of these Centrams at Tuscania is underway. In addition to receiving structural improvements, the Centrams will be redesigned from a gender perspective. The first goal is to improve connectivity to destinations in the surrounding neighborhood and improve the ease of getting from one mode to another, like from train to bus, and increase safety and comfort while waiting at connections, like bus stops. Another goal will be transforming the transit station into a destination itself by creating spaces for safe and enjoyable waiting and hanging out, because women spend more time waiting as part of their journey, as well as creating gathering spaces like for cultural events. And the third principle is to reduce the need to trip chain and reduce trips overall by creating a one-stop shop with commercial and social uses like retail shops, ATMs, and childcare at the transit station. In my time in Nagariyama, Japan, I got a glimpse of the potential of this more holistic approach to truly improve mobility for those of all genders and impact gender equity at a broader cultural level. Nagariyama is about 30 miles outside of Tokyo, and the cities are connected by a high-speed train. Nagariyama is a small city with new construction of single-family homes and multifamily housing, a historic center with traditional architecture and large green spaces. Around 2010, the mayor of Nagariyama led a marketing campaign to try and increase the city's local tax base by encouraging families with 2 wage earners living in Tokyo to move to Nagariyama. The city placed ads appealing to mothers on Tokyo's subway system, saying things like, "Thinking motherhood? Think Nagariyama." Nagariyama branded itself as the city for mothers. I want to note here that the concept of womanhood and motherhood employed by the city is exclusionary and does not reflect the diversity of women or mothers. The city's ads are rooted in assumptions about gender that reflect traditional and limiting gender norms, in which cisgender women are primary caretakers in heterosexual partnerships. This, of course, leaves so many women and gender-diverse people out of the picture and does not reflect the myriad forms that households, families, and caretaking can take. However, we'll see in this case how the city's design approach wound up allowing residents to subvert these traditional gender norms. Efforts to make the city work better for mothers went beyond advertising. One of the city's largest efforts was to redesign the main train station to Tokyo, the commuter hub that the city hoped that women moving to Nagariyama would use every day to get to work. One of the main strategies was to build child care facilities in the train station to reduce travel burden on caretakers. By placing child care facilities in the building at the station, caregivers have to take fewer trips and travel is more efficient. The city also organized a child transportation system to pick up students at stops near the train station so that caregivers could drop off children at the bus stop during their regular commute trip they would take anyways. In addition, the buildings surrounding the station include retail, like grocery, clothing, and home goods stores, cafes and restaurants, medical offices and pharmacies, and civic uses, like an annex of City Hall for bill pay and a public library. It also helps create lively, inviting public spaces that are active throughout the day and days of the week. It's common to see parents and youth gathered in the plaza outside the station. Although Nagariyama designed this and other interventions with a very specific and exclusive idea of a straight cisgender woman in a heterosexual relationship in mind, it wound up creating a city in which households have the opportunity to take agency in shifting the balance of caretaking as they see fit in their own families. Nagariyama's planning efforts have made it easier to parent and work outside the home for everyone, not just women. And women I interviewed told me this has created opportunity for men to take on more caretaking responsibility because it's easier for households to determine amongst themselves who will perform what roles. One woman I talked to said this is the reason why many families move to Nagariyama, because it's a place where they don't have to choose who will work outside the home and who will care for children. All people have equal access to both, and households can determine for themselves. I think one of the really powerful takeaways from this example is that by designing for those who've been left out of the planning and design process historically, which in this case is women, the city wound up creating spaces and systems that actually work better for everyone and have created opportunity to break the confines of cultural gender norms. In conclusion, I want to underscore something that stood out across all of the cases, that a gender-inclusive product begins with a gender-inclusive process. Gender is not a monolith, and experiences of gender vary across cultures and communities and are shaped by intersecting identities like race and ethnicity, sexuality, ability, age, and more. Because of this, there's no one-size-fits-all solution to a gender-inclusive public realm. Rather, the pathway to building inclusive spaces begins with empowering women, girls, and gender nonconforming individuals at all stages of the planning and design process, from concept development to design to construction to evaluation, to ensure that spaces reflect their needs and priorities and evaluate their impacts on gender equity in the long term. There's also need for more research and work on inclusive design strategies for gender nonconforming people. In all the sites I visited, gender inclusion mostly referred to inclusion of women and girls, and did not extend to those of all gender identities. However, most people I interviewed agreed on the profound need for greater focus on engagement of gender nonconforming people throughout the design process, and research on the unique ways in which gender nonconforming people travel and experience the built environment. With that, I'd like to reiterate my thanks to the Druker family and the Urban Planning and Design Department, and for the opportunity to come back and share my research with you today. And I'd like to invite Laura to take the podium.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, Carolyn. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Greenberg. I'm the 2020 Druker Fellow and MAUD 2020 as well. And as the first, but unfortunately not the last fellow to start this process during the global pandemic, I am excited and really grateful to be back safely at the GSD, able to share my research on EcoDistricts, a framework to advance equitable, sustainable, and resilient urban design at the neighborhood scale. Thank you very much to Ron Druker, to Dean Whiting, many of the professors here at the GSD, and to my family for their support. Most of all, thank you to the long list of people I had the privilege of speaking with during interviews, site tours, and brainstorming sessions, who have given me a much more grounded understanding of community development and influence how I practice urban design for the better. Today I'll present an overview of the research topic, introduce the EcoDistricts framework and the districts that are using it, key research findings, and wrap up with conclusions about the strengths and limitations of the EcoDistricts framework and its relevance to urban design. As we are all well aware of in this building, our urban environments face a series of challenges. social and racial injustice, inequality and disinvestment, and the growing impacts of climate change, just to name a few. These are global problems that require large-scale solutions, but day to day, most people experience them at the neighborhood scale. So it's important for us as designers to think about more localized solutions simultaneously. When considering global issues at a neighborhood scale, it's critical for us to be place-specific, responsive to the values and priorities of existing communities. We should root our work in histories of place, understand local contexts, learn from local expertise, and seek reparative solutions whenever possible. Urban designers and planners can't solve these urban challenges alone, but we do need to have the skills and tools to participate in addressing them collaboratively. This research project interrogates this practical juncture of advancing equity, sustainability, and climate resilience at the neighborhood scale. One set of tools that we have at our disposal are neighborhood scale design frameworks. These can be used across multiple geographies to guide design in a way that advances a given agenda. And on screen, you'll see just a small selection that focus on sustainability, health, and equitable development. Design frameworks take multiple forms. There are guides and toolkits, which help define excellence across performance areas and identify strategies and best practices. You'll recognize some familiar industry leaders here, from Gale Institute to PolicyLink, GARE, and even the EPA. And another type are third-party rating and certification systems. You're probably all the most familiar with the LEED neighborhood model, where points are earned within categories to receive a certification rating. Other examples include the Living Community Challenge, Star Communities, and the EcoDistricts protocol. I chose to focus on the EcoDistricts protocol, a newer third-party certification model seeking to advance equity, sustainability, and climate resilience. When I began the project, about 15 communities across the US had registered formally to use the protocol, so there was a decent sample size, but also a finite scope of sites to work with. My research was guided by the following questions: what types of places and communities are using the protocol and for what purposes? What are its built and non-built impacts on the urban environment? And what are its strengths and limitations? So that's what we're going to unpack. My goal is to both surface strategies for advancing equity, sustainability, and climate resilience, but to also convey how this framework in particular might be useful in advancing value-based urban design practice at the neighborhood scale, while also being realistic about where it falls short. So an ecological district refers to a spatially bounded area with a plan that integrates ecologically sound practices with sustainable and equitable community development. There are hundreds of ecological districts across the US today, but they're fairly difficult to compare directly because, like so many other efforts that invoke big concepts like equity, resilience, or sustainability, efforts really vary depending on the district. So the EcoDistricts, capital E, capital D protocol was created to fill the need for a more formalized framework. And this project is concerned strictly with communities engaged in that protocol. Until recently, the EcoDistricts protocol was overseen solely by a Portland, Oregon-based nonprofit founded in 2013. Through a partnership with the Clinton Global Initiative and in collaboration with hundreds of design professionals, they launched a standardized protocol around 2015. The protocol guides communities through the process of creating an eco-district and also serves as a certification standard. The protocol is underpinned by a participatory process during which a community frames their values in terms of measurable goals tied to actionable strategies. And it's structured around 3 core elements: framing imperatives in terms of equity, resilience, and climate protection, identifying priorities under a series of 6 categories, and planning implementation from formation and governance to the creation of a comprehensive roadmap to tracking performance metrics over time. A district completes these steps, provides documentation, and submits biannual progress reports to remain certified. The protocol can technically be used by many types of neighborhoods and districts and is really targeted to 3 main audiences: government, community organizations, and the private sector. However, urban designers are frequently involved in these efforts because we have critical design expertise that the other audiences do not have. I traveled to 13 registered eco-districts in 11 locations, conducting documentation, interviews, and site tours. I went to Central District and Capitol Hill in Seattle, Lloyd in Portland, Oregon, beautiful PB in San Diego, California, Little Haiti in Miami, Towerside in Minneapolis, Slavic Village and Clark Fulton Metro Health in Cleveland, Etna, Millvale, and Sharpsburg outside of Pittsburgh, High Falls in Rochester, and the Talbot-Norfolk Triangle Eco-Innovation District right here in Boston. 10 of these are neighborhoods located within a larger city, which comes with the benefit of being part of a larger ecosystem of resources, but also means they lack government authority over themselves. Interestingly, 3 districts, Millvale, Etna, and Sharpsburg, are adjacent independent boroughs right outside of Pittsburgh. And this comes with some resource challenges, but also the benefit of municipal authority, which seems to have served them quite well. They're able to more easily complete certain projects because they have the full support of their government decision makers. There are several types of districts which influence their motivation for using the protocol and the type of work they focus on. 9 are existing mixed-use residential areas, which you'll see in orange, with predominantly smaller scale fabric organized around a few higher density mixed-use corridors. Their motivations for using the protocol really vary. Some are concerned with home energy reduction, others with air quality and food access, others with cultural placekeeping and anti-displacement work. And I think what's notable about these in particular is that they have a lot of individual private stakeholders like homeowners, renters, business owners. And much of the work goes to either widely distributed support for these people or to creating public realm improvements that can be accessed and shared by all. Clark Fulton Metro Health in Cleveland is similar, except it has a large hospital anchor institution, which pushes their focus more towards health and well-being. Lloyd in Portland and High Falls in Rochester are business districts with larger block structure, much more retail and commercial, and big anchors. With fewer but larger stakeholders, they're able to focus on things like collective energy reduction in a way that the residential districts find more challenging. And finally, Towerside in Minneapolis is the only mostly new district built on previously industrial land undergoing mixed-use transit-oriented development. And they're able to put new district-scale infrastructure in place much more easily because their planning was done before most of the development. The districts vary in scale. There are 8 small, 3 medium, and 2 large districts. The smallest is right here in Boston, and the largest is in Slavic Village in Cleveland at about 5 square miles, which is a little bit bigger than Somerville for reference. The district scale does not seem to make much difference in what they focus on, but the smaller districts tend to feel more cohesive because the work is more concentrated. The urban character of the districts is very much influenced by their location, histories, and current market conditions. Many of the cities with hotter real estate markets, so think Seattle, Portland, Minneapolis, are experiencing a significant shift from the district's older character to newer, more generic mixed-use development. These districts tend to be using the protocol to guide that new development in a direction that benefits the existing community. Meanwhile, in cities with cooler markets, so Cleveland, High Falls, the boroughs outside of Pittsburgh, for example, are less volatile, with older structures and low-density commercial streets remaining and fewer signs of new construction or change in character. These districts use the protocol to harness their existing assets and efforts to attract investment and improve their area. And finally, most importantly, who lives here? Much of what intrigued me about the EcoDistricts protocol to begin with was that it was being used by areas with diverse demographics, not just predominantly high-income white areas, which frankly is what I expected when I first heard the term EcoDistrict. But you'll see that a number of the districts have either higher minority populations than their cities and/or higher poverty rates. These include Central District, a historically Black neighborhood in Seattle that has become increasingly white over the last few decades as a result of gentrification and displacement. Clark Fulton in Cleveland, which is home to the densest Hispanic and Latino population in Ohio. Slavic Village, which, despite its name, is demographically much like Cleveland with a significant Black population and a high poverty rate. Little Haiti in Miami is, of course, a historically Haitian community. Talbot-Norfolk Triangle in Boston is a predominantly Black community. And finally, High Falls in downtown Rochester, which has the highest poverty rate of all the districts. So this group of districts tend to center their work more on social and racial equity issues. Areas like cultural placekeeping, anti-displacement and affordable housing, and workforce development. The whiter, lower poverty districts do some of this as well, but with some exceptions, tend to be a bit more focused on sustainability and climate resilience. So overall, demographics and market condition play the largest role in districts, in what the districts choose to focus their efforts on. Through the research, I've been able to get a sense of how people are navigating the protocol process and the kind of work they're doing as a result. We'll explore a series of key findings about the strengths and limitations of the protocol as a tool to advance equitable, sustainable, and resilient design at the neighborhood scale. And we'll look at this across 4 relevant categories. First, the protocol process, which has 3 phases. It begins with registration. Then there are 3 years to complete certification, which consists of an imperatives commitment, the formation of a collaborative governance strategy, and a comprehensive roadmap plan. If approved, districts then submit progress reports every 2 years to maintain certification. Each of these steps involves producing a particular document. At an average of 150 pages, the roadmap in particular is a detailed planning document, ideally created with robust public input, which really requires design and planning expertise that most community development and nonprofit organizations seeking certification do not have in-house. For that reason, organizations that have successfully navigated certification tend to hire outside design consultants. Of the 13 districts I visited, 6 have successfully completed certification, and 1 more is pending. You'll see that these include Capitol Hill in Seattle, Lloyd in Portland, both districts in Cleveland, and the 3 adjacent districts right outside of Pittsburgh. This geographic clustering of districts, both in the Pacific Northwest and the Rust Belt, suggests there's a shared learning and momentum benefit of pursuing certification, though notably this benefit did not extend to Capitol Hill's neighbor, the historically Black Central District, also in Seattle. Based on conversations with people leading these districts through the protocol process, some of its strengths include its clarity. People feel it's quite easy to understand and helps to guide their work, and also appreciate how flexible it is. It really allows teams to tailor the framework to their existing conditions and work, rather than change what they're doing to score points or check certification boxes. It also builds a strong peer network of protocol users who are able to share best practices through convenings and workshops similar to the Highline network. However, some major limitations of the protocol process include high barriers of certification, particularly for communities of color and low-income communities. The process is fairly expensive, time-consuming, and as I mentioned, requires design and planning expertise that most organizations leading the charge don't have. They end up paying consultants, often urban designers, to put together and continually update the required plans, which is perhaps not the best use of their resources. And finally, it's a bit unclear what the value of certification is, particularly because this is such a new framework with much less of a track record than one like LEAD. A few districts feel it gives them an added level of credibility, but about half the districts, including 4 of the 6 minority and low-income districts, have not pursued certification any further because the effort required didn't seem worth it. A critical early step in the protocol is the establishment of an EcoDistricts governance body. This consists of a backbone organization with key stakeholder collaborators who set expectations through a declaration of collaboration. The backbone organization maintains overall strategic coherence, coordinates and manages day-to-day operation and implementation of the work. Of the districts I visited, 10 of them have fairly singular nonprofit backbone organizations. Capitol Hill in Seattle has a public housing backbone organization, and 2 have more interesting hybrids, which we'll look at in a little more detail. In Millvale, the work is guided by the Millvale EcoDistrict Collaborative, which has representatives from the backbone nonprofit, New Sun Rising, a local community development corporation, the local community library, and the borough itself. This represents an interesting combination of nonprofits with a variety of expertise and the actual public authority with decision-making power and funding ability. In Clark Fulton Metro Health in Cleveland, the work is guided by their core team, which consists of 8 members, an executive director of a community development organization, a representative from the local healthcare anchor, a representative from the city, their elected city council member, a member of a local philanthropy, and notably 3 neighborhood ambassadors. This is really the best example of a diverse team of cross-sectoral decision makers and direct representation from community members. The strengths of the EcoDistrict's governance and decision-making process include the declaration of collaboration process itself, which people are very enthusiastic about. They found it useful for laying out clear expectations, roles, and responsibilities up front. Since governance is shared across stakeholders, when done well, this can lead to diverse expertise and also distributes the workload so as not to overwhelm any one person and ensures that the success of the vision is not tied to any one organization. Unfortunately, with a few exceptions, there is a lack of direct community representation in decision-making overall. Since many of the backbone organizations are nonprofits, the decision makers end up being their board of directors, often not a diverse or representative group of people. Direct representation requires intentional power sharing, which the protocol does not emphasize enough yet. Finally, multiple districts expressed that though initial excitement about collaborating helped maintain early momentum, it has been quite difficult to maintain over time. One downside to a multi-organizational governance model is you have to navigate staff turnover across multiple organizations. And if the EcoDistrict's work isn't deeply embedded, it can get lost when even 1 or 2 people leave. Districts are advancing a combination of equity, sustainability, and climate resilience through built work in a number of ways. We'll look at projects across a number of common categories: infrastructure, streetscapes, food gardens, community buildings, public art, and public education. In the newly built Towerside district in Minneapolis, they're working on introducing resilient district-scale infrastructure systems before new development occurs. This stormwater garden, which doubles as a public space, was an early win for them. It can hold over 200,000 gallons of treated runoff and drains a roughly 2-block area surrounding it. It's a first-of-its-kind project for them, resulting from a voluntary agreement between 4 adjacent private developers to manage runoff jointly. In Lloyd, in Portland, they're working on a pollinator corridor, a protected bikeway with native plants alongside that stretches the entire length of their district in order to create a more sustainable habitat for insects and wildlife. In Millvale, they've got a robust community food and seed garden. This teaches the community about horticulture and land stewardship, while also addressing limited food access, so advancing sustainability, resilience, and equity all at the same time. They do free vegetable days hosted by the local library, educational programming, and ultimately aim to provide 95% of the food needs for Millvale's restaurant cluster. In Little Haiti in Miami, they opened a beautiful cultural complex that includes small-scale markets, rentable event space, an outdoor courtyard, and a black box theater. This was constructed as part of an equitable development effort to prevent cultural displacement as the neighborhood faces gentrification and development pressures. Finally, here in Boston, local residents, in partnership with an artist and community group, painted a street mural outside of Elmhurst Park to kick off the city's Neighborhood Slow Streets pilot program. The mural celebrates the neighborhood's work as an eco-innovation district, brings new public art to the area, and creates a safer pedestrian environment. and the park itself also features additional murals. Last, in Sharpsburg, they have air quality measurement hubs that allow people to easily understand how good or bad the air quality is based on the color of the station that day. Their goal is to make a usually invisible public health issue visible and to bring attention to their larger effort to improve regional air quality. There are some clear strengths in the built impacts. I think there's some very exciting district scale systems work being explored that starts to frame both natural and infrastructural systems at a collective scale. Both the Little Haiti and the Boston projects highlight the potential of built work to serve as visible cultural placekeeping, indicating to new arrivals that there's an existing authentic culture that must be respected and honored. The Sharpsburg air quality stations and other instances of educational messaging are an important way that complex issues of climate resilience, sustainability, and equity can be more accessible to everyday people walking by. And in general, these built projects are critical because they build excitement and momentum and help attract further funding. So I've intentionally lifted up some equity-focused examples today, but one limitation of the built work overall across the districts is that built projects tend to lean more towards climate resilience and sustainability. Each district must include equity-focused projects in their roadmap planning, but these are not always the projects that get focus or funding, and the protocol does not do a great job of countering that currently. Finally, a lot of the work to advance sustainability, climate resilience, and especially equity focuses on non-built impacts. These fall into programmatic areas like workforce development, small business grants, housing support and educational programming, and non-programmatic ones like process and policy, in-district collaboration, and cross-municipal collaboration. In Rochester, there's a youth workforce development program that installs and cultivates urban cut flower farms on vacant lots in the neighborhood just east of High Falls, which has a much more diverse population than the district boundaries itself. Flowers are harvested, arranged, and sold by program participants, aiming to empower young adults and give them a sense of running a small business. In Central District, the Central Area Collaborative gives out small business grants to support local Black legacy businesses. I was fortunate to attend the reopening of Jackson's Catfish Corner, which originally opened in 1985, but wasn't sure they'd be able to stay in the neighborhood amidst gentrification pressures. The collaborative provided a small business grant and helped to secure the long-term lease. Also in Central District, they have developed a design review process that new large developments must go through for approvals. The initial core principles were based on architectural writings on Afrocentric architecture, tying directly into the values and heritage of the area's legacy residents. This review process means that the community has more agency over what their neighborhood looks like in the future, and has resulted in new buildings that are more culturally and place-specific to this historic Black neighborhood. In Lloyd, there are a number of in-district collaborations led by a group of residents and business owners who develop sustainability projects that address their district goals. They've found that this not only helps them achieve specific outcomes, but also creates inter-neighborhood resiliency as people get to know their neighbor better. And finally, the Triborough EcoDistricts, made up of Millvale, Etna, and Sharpsburg, is a collaboration between 3 different municipalities grappling with similar but distinct issues. With just over 10,000 residents combined, they felt their efforts would be better served if they teamed up. They're working together to create a collective library system. They have a network of gardens that do seed swaps and share best practices. They host coordinated events and even collaborate on grants. The strengths of the non-built impacts include the promise of neighborhood-scale collaborations. Lloyd illustrates how using the framework can lead to large district-scale improvements while also building social resilience. The ability to scale up is also exciting. The Triborough Eco-District is the first cluster to take advantage of this, creating cross-district systems and collaborating strategically when it serves them. This is really made possible because they started with the same protocol and come to the table with shared language. Non-built impacts also start to get more closely at social and racial equity through areas like workforce development, small business and housing supports, and changes to design and development processes. The EcoDistricts work is able to influence policy and processes in an equitable way, and Central District's design review is a great example of that. Ultimately, the measure of how useful the EcoDistricts protocol is comes down to how well it helps communities advance their self-determined values and priorities as they relate to equity, sustainability, and climate resilience. There's really no singular answer to that, but again, factors to think about if you're working on a project that is considering using the protocol. The protocol does a great job of helping communities develop a shared framework that can amplify existing efforts, frame that within a cohesive narrative, and make room for new projects. A lot of the work I encountered was not newly created to satisfy the protocol requirements, but was strengthened as the EcoDistricts effort attracted like-minded collaborators and funding to an area. There are really interesting collaborations emerging, both within districts and across. And the systems level work, whether that's energy systems or library systems, gets beyond the block and neighborhood scale and starts to have larger urban impacts. Putting shared values at the center means there's a common language and understanding to start with. And finally, the planning process helps communities get ahead of development pressure by already having an agreed upon value-based neighborhood plan. This helps shift the power dynamic of development and increases community agency. As I mentioned, there are also some big limitations in its current state, one of the most glaring being the high barrier to entry. So many nonprofit backbone organizations, especially those working in low-income and minority communities, have limited capacity and are much more focused on their core missions. A protocol and certification process that requires a large amount of time, resources, and outside expertise simply is not the right tool in some of these cases. Another limitation is that the distributed governance and ongoing need for collaboration can make it difficult to sustain over time. The work often lives or dies with one or two core people. And finally, there's a real lack of focus and specificity around racial equity that makes the protocol much less useful, particularly for communities of color. The protocol itself is mostly race neutral, which punts responsibility to individual districts rather than baking racial equity in as a core tenet to be addressed. It does not get into urban histories and therefore does not acknowledge historic injustices that form the foundation for why our cities are inequitable today, nor does it set up districts to explore reparative strategies. And finally, it seems to assume that collaboration is as simple as reaching out to another organization, but fails to acknowledge that there may be long-standing tension to address before building a shared vision for the future. So at a high level, the protocol has many useful qualities and is absolutely an urban design tool worth consideration if you're looking for a neighborhood scale framework. But in its attempt to be so broadly applicable, it lacks much needed specificity, neglects significant urban issues rooted in race, and ends up being less relevant to lower income and minority districts who face some of the most urgent challenges related to equity, sustainability, and climate resilience. As it turns out, the EcoDistricts nonprofit agrees with some of the limitations. In the middle of my research, the nonprofit was acquired by the Partnership for Southern Equity, a Black-led nonprofit that seeks social justice through policies and actions that equitably distribute wealth, resources, and power. A few months ago, when I thought I was just about done, they announced they will be rebranding from EcoDistricts to Just Growth Communities and integrating a racial justice lens into every aspect of the protocol. There will be a larger focus on reinvestment, environmental justice, and racial justice, and they intend to streamline the certification process. It will be more heavily centered on power and capacity building for resident leaders and others, and focus more on disruptive systems changing policy action. So this is a promising shift that seeks to address some of the limitations I encountered through the research. And my hope is that these changes will make what is already a useful tool for certain neighborhoods even more useful for low-income and minority communities. So keep an eye out for EcoDistricts 2.0 in the coming months and years. To conclude, this has been an amazing experience. Thank you again to Ron Druker and the GSD for having me back, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much, Laura and Carolyn, for the synthetic presentation. Probably as we announced, if you don't mind, we are going to come to the podium to have some Q&A session. Now we are open to have a conversation also if there are any questions or any suggestions from the audience. Huh? In the meantime, I mean, just to start that, I was thinking perhaps I prepared at least one question to you both in a way. Laura, after your research, because I think that very well explained the categories of and how this protocol is acting and creating, promoting a certain type of development, which I think that's very good. Eh? What will you be your recommendation if you have to recommend to visit one place and to learn something that we can see that is the more? I think I appreciate very much the way that you were also addressing some critical points. I mean, I think that that's very good in the research, in moving to one place and then discovering something else. But nevertheless, what will be the best example that we may like to visit? Don't tell us Boston, because we want to travel.
No, not Boston. That's too easy. I think it's really hard, especially with the eco-districts, to really pick one, which is why I tried to give more of an overview, a comparative overview across districts. I would say if you're interested in kind of best practices of how the eco-districts process can go really successfully, I think the tri-borough eco-districts right outside of Pittsburgh are a really good example. They're, you know, kind of a grassroots, very locally oriented group of eco-districts. I think they're doing really interesting kind of cross-municipal work. That to me was really one of the most surprising and interesting outcomes of the research for me, is like the idea of scaling this up beyond a neighborhood scale. So I think the tri-borough eco-districts would be kind of top recommendation. I do think they are extremely white districts, and so they face, you know, very different challenges than some of the lower income minority districts. I think that Central District in Seattle and Slavic Village in Cleveland are two kind of archetypal majority black districts that are facing really different challenges and reacting to them in very different ways. So Central District in Seattle is, you know, in a hotter market. It's facing kind of cultural displacement issues. And so, you know, has all these strategies to deal with that. So I think that's a really good example if you're, you know, facing similar challenges. And then Slavic Village in Cleveland, which is a, you know, much cooler market, so are facing, you know, really more focus on reinvestment and, you know, creating a stronghold for their long-standing residents through kind of public realm investment. So those would be my recommendations.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think it's a very complete and complex answer. Very good. Thank you very much. Yeah. Carolyn, I'd like to also to ask you, because I think it was very interesting the way you synthesize the problems and the tracks for the solution, which I think is very interesting. Also, in a certain moment you presented what you said, that the practical solutions and the strategic solutions. What will be your advice in a way that is, we have to fight for more the strategic or more the practical? What will be perhaps a recommendation from your experience in a way? Thank you.
Yeah, I wish I had a really straightforward answer. This is something, so where I work now at Concui Design Initiative, for the past 3 years, we've been partnering with the Department of Transportation in LA to develop a gender inclusive plan for the transportation system. And we grapple with that question all the time. And I think where I've landed is, although the way they're set, I think probably the way I frame them and the way they're set up, it kind of like elevates strategic solutions as the better ones, the ones that can truly shift gender roles and have potential to change gender equity more broadly. I think the reality is you need both. Like we need, and I think a way to think about them is on a timeline. You know, if there are urgent needs around safety and comfort waiting at the bus stop or getting on the train, that solution, that practical solution to add lighting or increase activity around the bus stop is essential right now, but it can't be the end of the road, and it has to be paired with these more strategic solutions that change the way you arrive at the bus stop and get on the train and for what reason in the first place.
Good, thank you. Thank you very much. Open, there is any question or any observation from the audience? Please, Alex.
Both of you, to both the fellows, you concentrated a bit on how processes that played out a while ago have yielded outcomes that maybe aren't desirable or are not perfect right now, and therefore we need to revisit those processes. I'm wondering if you have any sort of recommendations or takeaways from your really nice research as to how there could be a more frequent kind of feedback between the outcomes and the process as it's being underdone, as it's ongoing, basically, so that, for instance, we don't have to implement certain things and then have to go back and revisit them years later. You know, in terms of maybe participatory feedback before the process begins, or kind of ongoing feedback, kind of analysis while it's going on as well.
Sure, yeah, I think totally agree, we need many more feedback loops in planning in general. I think the EcoDistricts protocol, for me, partially was interesting because it is kind of under, you know, the basis of it is this participatory process. So even while it may be kind of initiated by one or two organizations who are interested in it, the process throughout really centers participation. There's, you know, regular needing to prove that you're doing the things you said you were going to do. So I think just within kind of district work itself, it's pretty good at kind of embedding a participatory process. That being said, these are really individual districts, and especially the ones that are within a larger city, you know, do not get above that neighborhood level. So I think there absolutely needs to be kind of larger, whoever is making the decision in the city about planning needs to be much more feedback loops with them.
Thank you.
Thanks. Two thoughts come to mind right away. One, I went to a project in Vienna that didn't make it into the slideshow, but I think offers some insight into that process. It was a housing development in which women who lived in the housing, or who helped design the project, then lived in the housing, which is, you know, the housing will outlive like any of our lifespan, so it's not a forever solution. But there's this like baked in evaluation and feedback loop there by the actual residents being people who helped design it. And so they did tweak uses over time because they didn't turn out exactly the way they planned or they needed something different. Another thing that comes to mind is in this work in LA, we're trying to like take a lot of these lessons and apply them to this project in LA. And one of the things we've done is hire community members from the areas that we're studying to kind of validate our findings. So we have working groups where we offer, like, this is what we're seeing from the data. Does this represent your lived experience of your neighborhood? And that has been one way that we've tried to kind of implement this process in an ongoing way.
Yeah. You know, just to pick up on the feedback loops, I'm just curious, both from Laura, but also from Caroline. Laura, you know, the eco districts you visited within the planning agencies. Is there a conscious sort of culture of archiving and collecting this data? Because you said there were many data points that they sort of set out just even for public awareness, because I think that's sort of linked to not only setting up participatory processes, but also these feedbacks. And Carolyn, for you, I'm just curious, Mumbai also didn't make it to your slideshow. What were your findings there?
Yeah, I think part of the EcoDistricts, like the nonprofit idea behind having a standardized framework and having this, not overly rigid, but there are things that districts need to do to get and remain certified, is to have, if you are certified, you need to submit reports every 2 years. They are publicly accessible, which was enormously helpful for me as a researcher because there's a central depository of things to look at. But also, as you're alluding to, means that there's some accountability in terms of sticking to performance metrics, or at least being real when you don't meet them, and kind of transparent with the people that you're responsible to.
You're right, Mumbai did not make it. And I had a wonderful time there and learned a lot. But in part because the findings look almost identical to Mexico City. The difference is, so Mumbai has taken the same approach. There are women's only cars in the regional rail system. And they've also moved towards more holistic comprehensive plans for stations, but the work in Mexico City is just more advanced. They've broken ground and have renderings. So I think you could have swapped in Mumbai for Mexico City in a lot of those slides, but Mexico City just has more visuals at this point.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much for the remarks. I think I have a final comment. Could be in relation. Are you aware about what they call the eco-quartier in France? Because I think it's a. No, I'd like just to mention, because there are also people that may like perhaps to take your research and to go further in this way, because I think that was very interesting the way that you were focusing on the process, which I think is very good. For me, what is a little bit lacking on some of the examples that you show that I don't know personally them, is the lack of urbanity. The sense that you feel that you are not really very much in a city where you had the values of, in a way, the traditional city, we can say. Yeah? And these guys with the eco-quartier, which in fact is also mandatory, the process and the participation process, that's very clear. But they put a lot of effort also on the saving the energy, the water, and creating then density. Which I think this is a very important factor, because in a way we always know that when you get density, then probably the things that happen in a different way. I'm just saying that because you did a fantastic research and a very inspiring type of comments and comparing so many different situations in the country, which I think is very important. And these eco-quartiers start producing some very beautiful areas that you feel then the people. With social housing, with many different type of things, which is in the end is what we're aiming. But I think the factor of design, it pops up in a way. It creates that anyway. And that I'm just taking this opportunity to thank you both again for the fantastic research. I'm sure that was probably what Ron Druker was thinking, in a way that projects, they're going deep into the subject, is the way, and then you take one thing and then you go into that, and then as a GSD we can get the benefit of your feedback, in the way, and I think that is very, very important for all us, and then we can take your line and go on in a way, and that is what probably people that they are applying also this year, I mean, that we have quite a lot of also young people, and that they are very motivated and making research about the new issues, that they are also expanding the urban design field, which I think is so important. And in that respect, I think I would suggest that we have a small reception outside, and then we can continue the conversation freely among everybody and with Mr. Druker as well. Thank you very much.